From the very first moment Jonathan Pierce walked onto a stage, something extraordinary happened. His voice didn't just fill the room, it filled hearts. He had a rare kind of tone that could only be described as divine. His vocals shimmered, with clarity and emotional richness, rising like sunlight through stained glass windows. Whether he sang a powerful Broadway-style ballad or a sacred church hymn, Jonathan had a way of making every word feel personal and every note feel like a prayer. But the beauty of his voice only told part of the story. Behind the poise, charm, and angelic sound was a deeply complex man, a man whose life was filled with quiet battles, deep introspection, and a longing for peace that couldn't be achieved by applause alone. Jonathan Pierce Edwards was born on November 15, 1970, in Odessa, Texas, a town where faith and music were part of everyday life. Raised in a Christian household, he was immersed in the traditions of Southern gospel music from an early age. Church wasn't just a Sunday obligation. It was where he first found his voice and where others first noticed its magic. He sang in choirs, participated in local performances, and by the time he was a teenager, there was no denying that his talent was something special. It wasn't long before his voice carried him beyond the walls of his hometown church. As a young man, he moved to Nashville, Tennessee, the spiritual heart of Christian and gospel music. In Nashville, Jonathan found mentors who helped shape not only his technique but also his spiritual outlook. He began studying vocal performance with renowned coaches, refining his abilities into a style that was equal parts soul and precision. His first major break came when he was invited to join the Imperials, one of the most influential gospel groups in America. It was a prestigious gig, one that put him in front of large audiences and taught him the discipline required for the professional gospel circuit. But it was when he later joined the legendary Gaither vocal band founded by gospel icon Bill Gaither that Jonathan truly entered the spotlight. With his youthful charisma, effortless range, and impeccable pitch, he quickly became a standout. The Gaither vocal band was known for its impeccable harmonies and its power to move audiences. With spiritually charged performances, Jonathan's addition to the group brought a fresh energy. His voice added brightness and fluidity to the ensemble's sound, and fans noticed. People didn't just hear him, they felt him. He wasn't the stereotypical gospel singer in a suit and tie singing tradition-bound melodies. He was expressive, magnetic, and undeniably gifted. Yet even as Jonathan gained fame, he remained humble. He never seemed to bask in the spotlight. Instead, he used it to connect with people, to offer messages of hope and healing through music. It was during this time that he launched his solo career, which would cement him as one of Christian music's most unique voices. Albums like One Love 1995, Mission 1998, and Sanctuary 2000 showcased his evolution as an artist. These projects didn't just rely on gospel tradition, they fused contemporary stylings with deeply spiritual themes. Tracks like I Believe in Christ, Healing Hands, and Farther Along became staples for fans who found comfort in his vulnerability and worshipful delivery. But while Jonathan's songs uplifted countless listeners, his own inner life was far more complicated. Beneath the polished image was a man wrestling with identity in a religious culture that often left little room for nuance. Jonathan's private struggle with his sexual identity was something he rarely, if ever, addressed in public. In an industry that was and often still is steeped in conservative values, coming out could have meant the end of everything he had built. The fear of being rejected by fans, churches, and peers weighed heavily on him. As a result, he remained silent, carrying that burden alone. It's a silence that speaks volumes, not because it was shameful, but because it reveals the painful tightrope so many walk between authenticity and acceptance. Close friends later revealed that Jonathan lived with quiet anxiety. His faith in God never faltered, but his belief in being accepted as his true self was another matter. He often felt trapped between a world that celebrated his talent and a system that might reject the man behind it. Despite this personal storm, Jonathan continued creating beauty. In the early 2000s, he pivoted from music to explore new creative passions, specifically interior design. It was a career change that might have surprised fans, but to those who knew him, it made perfect sense. Design allowed him to create beauty in another form, one that was more visually expressive and perhaps less scrutinized. He appeared on HGTV programs like Designing for the Sexes and Curb Appeal, quickly becoming a favorite for his warm, confident presence and eye for detail. Audiences saw him bring life, elegance, and warmth to homes across America. Behind the scenes, Jonathan founded his own firm, Pierce & Company, in Nashville. The business thrived. His interior designs were featured in major magazines, and clients praised his creativity, charm, and professionalism. Design gave him something music never fully could: space to breathe. It was in this new chapter of his life that he began to live more openly, surrounding himself with people who accepted and loved him for all that he was. Though he never made a public statement about his sexuality, those close to him say he was at peace, finally living with a little more freedom, a little more truth. Yet even as he found new forms of success, Jonathan never completely left music behind. He continued to perform at select events, occasionally returned to the studio, and always stayed connected to his roots. His faith remained central, even if his path no longer aligned with institutional norms. In quieter moments, he would share music with close friends, drawing strength from the same hymns and melodies that first shaped him as a boy. Then, in May 2020, tragedy struck. Jonathan underwent a routine heart surgery. The procedure was not expected to be life-threatening, but complications arose, and days later, he passed away. He was only 49 years old. The news stunned those who knew him and devastated fans across the country. Tributes poured in from gospel musicians, television personalities, fashion experts, and countless fans who had followed his journey. Many hadn't heard from him in years, but the moment his name returned to the headlines, it stirred memories of joy, nostalgia, and gratitude. Gone too soon. That was the phrase echoed across social media. But what lingered was more than just grief. It was a sense of loss for a man whose story was never fully told, whose voice held so much more than what the world ever got to hear. Jonathan's legacy is not just his music or his design, it's the courage he showed by simply continuing to create, even when he was hurting. His songs still play in churches and homes. His design work lives on in the spaces he transformed, and his memory endures in the hearts of those who saw beyond the surface. He reminds us that behind every spotlight is a human soul, a person yearning to be loved, to be understood, and to be whole. His life wasn't perfect. It was complicated, courageous, and deeply meaningful. And in many ways, it reflected the very messages he tried to share through music: grace, redemption, and the longing for peace. Today, when people listen to "One Love" or "I Believe in Christ," they don't just hear notes, they feel Jonathan's heart, his presence, his essence. And that's what makes his legacy timeless. For those who struggle in silence, who feel like they must hide who they are to be accepted, Jonathan's life offers a quiet kind of hope, a reminder that even amid fear, you can still make beauty. Even when unrecognized, your voice still matters. He didn't get to tell his full story in life, but in death, people are finally beginning to understand the man behind the music. Jonathan Pierce was more than a singer. He was a storyteller, a truth seeker, and a vessel of grace in an often graceless world. His was a voice that came from heaven, and even now, long after it has been stilled, it continues to sing. In the weeks following Jonathan's passing, countless stories began to surface. Former colleagues, choir members, stage managers, and even fans who had met him only briefly came forward to share moments that, on their own, might have seemed small, but together, painted a picture of a deeply compassionate and empathetic man. Former tour technician recalled how Jonathan would often be the last one to leave a venue, not because he had to, but because he made time for everyone who wanted to speak to him. He didn't just offer a handshake, he offered full attention. In dressing rooms, on buses, and backstage, he had a way of making people feel seen. In an industry often characterized by egos and hierarchy, Jonathan led with humility. His impact stretched far beyond music charts and television ratings. He became a spiritual companion to many, even if they never met him in person. For those who were lonely, uncertain, or quietly struggling with their own identity in faith spaces, Jonathan's music offered comfort without judgment. That may have been his most sacred gift, not just to perform, but to hold space for others. And yet, much of his story remains undertold. Unlike many of his peers in the Christian music scene, Jonathan did not receive a grand farewell from the religious establishment. Some tributes were muted, even absent. The discomfort that surrounded his identity and life lingered in his death. But the fans, those who had heard something deeper in his voice, stepped in to carry the memory forward. His songs found new meaning in hindsight. Lyrics once sung as praise began to be heard as personal pleas. "I Believe in Christ" wasn't just a declaration, it was a hope he clung to. "Healing Hands" sounded less like a performance and more like a whispered prayer. Listeners who had once admired him from afar began to realize that his message had always been layered. There was always something more between the lines. Many of his supporters have since used his life as a starting point for broader conversations about inclusion, about the cost of silence, and about how we honor those who don't fit into neatly defined boxes. Jonathan's life challenged the idea that faith and identity must be in conflict. In fact, he showed that when the two walk together in honesty, something profoundly beautiful can emerge. In Nashville, where he had built both his music and design careers, friends gathered in quiet memorials. Some met at churches, others at design studios or outdoor patios. They didn't need grand stages to celebrate him. They remembered his laugh, his storytelling, his warmth. They spoke about his ability to enter a room and make it better, not just with his voice or his style, but with his presence, and that's the heart of it. Presence. Jonathan was fully present when he sang, when he designed, when he offered a hug, or even when he sat quietly beside someone in need. He didn't perform empathy, he lived it. That's what made his absence feel so sudden and so heavy. It wasn't just about losing a talent, it was about losing a spirit that had always made others feel safe. Some say Jonathan's story is tragic, but perhaps it's more truthful to call it unfinished, because his influence continues to ripple outward. Young LGBTQ Christians now discovering his music are asking new questions. Churchgoers who once sang his songs without knowing his story are now engaging in deeper conversations, and artists trying to live their truth in spaces that don't always allow it are finding courage in his example. Jonathan Pierce's legacy is no longer just about what he gave us, but what we now choose to do with the memory of his life. Will we create spaces where future artists don't have to choose between calling and truth? Will we learn to see beyond the surface and hear the silent struggles behind even the most beautiful voices? Will we make room for people to be both faithful and flawed, devout and different? Jonathan didn't get to answer these questions in full, but he opened the door. And now it's up to the rest of us to walk through it with the same compassion, creativity, and courage he showed every day. His light may no longer shine from a stage, but it continues to glow in the hearts of those he moved. And if you listen closely, if you really listen not just with your ears, but with your spiritual, still hear it. That voice, that soul, that whisper of grace. So the next time his song plays, take a moment, let it wash over you. Remember, the man who poured his heart into every note, who gave us music, design, empathy, and authenticity, who didn't live to please a world that demanded perfection, but who lived to reflect beauty even when it came from pain. Jonathan Pierce wasn't just a singer, he was a light for those navigating shadows. And though we lost him too soon, the echo of his voice and the lessons of his life remain. Thank you, Jonathan, for the songs, for strength, for the soul you shared with us. You may be gone, but your music and your life